My fourth job in the international sector was the first job I took, which was outside of the African continent. And I went to work in France, and I worked essentially in Paris, officially Neuilly-sur-Seine, which is in Hauts-de-Seine, in the first Banlieue or suburb of Paris. But yeah, it was pretty much Paris. I could see the Eiffel Tower every morning as I walked to work. Yeah, that gave me a warm feeling inside, knowing that you are somewhere so iconic, such a tremendous global city. I took a job as curriculum director at Marymount International School of Paris. It was a school with an American identity, and professionally it brought some challenges because I'd never worked with the American standards-based curriculum before, and I basically had to teach myself a whole new approach to education. And I'd say I did so pretty damn successfully, and did so in a very short period of time. Took to it like a duck to water. Essentially though, if you're knowledgeable about education, you can make that transition from one system to another fairly seamlessly. Marymount, it was about 90 years old when I joined it, and it's run by the religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. And it was lovely to get back into a Catholic school, because the schools I've worked in when I worked in England were all Catholic schools. And there was a real kind of warm sense of community. And in no way did it ever seem like it was forced. It was just genuine. It was guided by gospel values. And gospel values are just basically those of compassion, of love, of recognizing one's human dignity and campaigning for social justice. And this environment was wonderful. The sisters had protested at Green and Common. They were the sort of sisters who had lived their gospel values. They had walked the walk. The sisters actually lived on the top floor of the administration building. That was their home. It was a former convent. It still is a convent in that sense. And there were 3 or 4 sisters there throughout my stay. But the school was headed by an American guy, and we got on really well, and it was great working for him. Unfortunately, he left after my first year, and a new head came in. And again, she was okay. She was a lady from New York, a really passionate woman, really had the interests of the school and the children at heart. Day-to-day life at Marymount was good. I stayed first of all in Courbevoie, which was just over the Seine from Neuilly-sur-Seine, and I'd walk to work every morning. It took about 20 minutes. What was strange about living in Paris compared to working in other international schools was the fact that I had to fend for myself a lot more. In my previous schools, I've been given accommodation, all my bills were paid, my transport was taken care of. Didn't really have to worry about too much. But working back in Europe, it meant that I had to find myself somewhere to live, and I was responsible for all aspects of my daily life, which is kind of normal for most people. But yeah, you kind of do get used to living in a very protected environment. So yeah, it took a while to adjust back. Having left Zambia, I was keen to bring Deborah over to Europe so we could continue our lives together. And we made a few mishaps in the initial stages. So the first time we applied for a Schengen visa, which is the easiest way to bring her over, we kind of messed it up. We didn't really get proper references from her work, from her employer, and thus she was rejected, and they said you had to wait another 12 months to apply. So what we did, we took a couple of trips down to South Africa, and I'd fly down and we'd spend a week or so together, and it was wonderful. And we did that twice during the following year, and our relationship just grew stronger and stronger. The second time I actually went to South Africa, I managed to convince my then boss that there was a really good education exhibition in Johannesburg and that I should go on behalf of the school. It was a really good conference, but I could have found them closer to home. But I think he also recognised my personal circumstance, and he was a very kind, compassionate man, and allowed me to go to this conference. And Deborah and I stayed in a wonderful hotel in Sandton, and we really enjoyed living the big city life. Yeah, it was fun. And South Africa is much better than the reputation that it gets. Even Johannesburg, you know, I find it to be a really kind of lively, vibrant city. Yeah, it can be dangerous in certain areas, but we never met any trouble. And there were many other interracial couples around, and I think the younger South African people are much more kind of liberal than perhaps their forefathers. So about a year after I'd moved to France, I was able to bring Deborah over, and she came over first of all on a Schengen visa, and we lived together as a couple for several months, and we had a wonderful time. The only drawback that we encountered was how difficult it was to get her into France. She had all her papers, she had a visa, she had insurance, she had a guarantee from me that I'd look after her financially during her stay, which you have to do when you invite someone to stay with you in the European Union. Everything was watertight. There were no holes. But at immigration, she was held up and actually detained for 2 nights, 3 days, until a judge released her on appeal. She was held on spurious grounds that she didn't carry cash, and apparently she needed to show cash to enter the country. Now, if someone turned up with thousands of euros worth of cash, again, there'd be question marks and be, why are you carrying so much cash, and why would you want to do that? I was the other side of the barrier. I was there to meet her, and I had the letters showing that I was guaranteeing her stay. I could have withdrawn the cash from the ATM, but no, that was a terrible experience of French immigration. It all worked out in the end. Yeah, that left a bitter taste in the mouth, but we got on with it. Got her out, flew down to Barcelona for a few days, which I'd pre-arranged, had a little trip there, and then went back up to Paris and basically lived as a couple in my apartment, by then in Seine, which is another bungalow in Haute de Seine. And just before she was due to go back to Zambia, to go back home, something happened which changed our lives forever, which is Deborah fell pregnant with Michael, and she travelled back. Shortly afterwards, she told me she was pregnant, and of course we hastily reorganised for her to come back to France, and she did so, and she was well looked after by the French medical teams and the American hospital in Neuilly-sur-Seine, and then later on in the Franco-Britannia hospital in Levallois-Perret, where Michael was born. It was a bit complicated because she only had a 6 months visa, but we were able to go to the doctor and get letters to extend her visa, which meant that she could stay in France for the duration of her pregnancy and a few months later while Michael came through the first stages of his early life. So the highlight of life in France will always be the fact that Michael was born there. But we also had a wonderful time. I mean, it's such an amazing city to explore in Paris. And you know, most days we make our way into the city just to walk around. It's, you know, you've got landmarks everywhere. There's somewhere out of the tourist guide on every corner. Cafe life is just fantastic, and we really enjoyed that. Yeah, just really enjoyed the vibe, and Deborah would love to go back to Paris one day. You never know, that may materialise, we shall see. We didn't want to leave as soon as we did, but it was this visa issue. Deborah wasn't able to have the right to remain in France, so at some point she would have had to return to Zambia. So the easiest thing was to find somewhere we could go together as a family, myself, Deborah and Michael, and I found a job in Nigeria, and that was the next chapter of our lives together when we moved over there. But France will always be a real special place in our heart. We really love living there. We travelled a lot. We went down to Lyon, we went to Marseille, we went to Bordeaux, went to Toulouse, and many of the smaller places in between. And I'd hire a car to do so. It wasn't worth having a car in and around Paris because you get everywhere on the metro and the buses, and we just used public transport, occasionally a taxi if it was late at night. I guess one of the strangest experience was the night of the Bataclan attacks, when dozens of people were murdered in the city of Paris because we were out that night and we weren't far away from the venue. We were actually in a bar with my parents and with my best mate, Rory, and we were watching Ireland in a World Cup qualifier. It could be a European Championship qualifier, I forget now. But anyway, we were having a great night and we got word of these attacks, and we immediately just left the pub and immediately just jumped on a bus, got as near as we could to home, and then public transport all closed down, but we managed to get a taxi for the last bit to get home. And that was a weird time, tragic for the people in Paris and across France. And it had big repercussions on Marymount because our security was upped. We had police outside our school gates every day because we had children of very famous parents who were part of our community, and they were potentially targets, I guess, for terrorists. So we were really careful. There was only ever one way into the school with a double gate. No visitors were allowed in unless they were vetted properly. And that made you feel really comfortable and really safe and secure. But it's not something you really want in a school, you know, schools where children go, and yeah, that bit was a bit tough. But yeah, we loved our time. The sisters of the Religious Sacred Heart of Mary are the most wonderful people. They flew me to New York a couple of times for conferences. I got to visit where their mother home is. I also went down to Béziers in the south of France, where their order originated, and they're so proud of their values and what they stand for, and it was an honour and a privilege to work for them. I'd happily go back and work for those guys again. A wonderful group of people. So yeah, Marymount will always have a very special place in my heart. It's hard to say which is my favourite school. It's probably between Marymount and St Andrews in Malawi, for different reasons, but I love both experiences. So then, yeah, the next chapter is Nigeria, so follow me.